Hi there, I'm Eshaan Mani, president of the iWRITE Youth Club, and today I'm super excited to speak with Ms. Saadia Faruqi in our latest installment of the iWRITE exclusive author series. Ms. Faruqi is a Pakistani-American author, essayist, and interfaith activist. She has written tons and tons of widely loved books, including the children's early reader series Yasmin, middle grade novels A Place at the Table, co-written with Laura Chauvin, and A Thousand Questions. And her latest book is Yusuf Azim is Not a Hero. Saadia is editor in chief of Blue Minaret, a magazine for Muslim art, poetry, and prose. And she lives in Houston, Texas, the best city, with her husband and children. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I do agree. Houston is very awesome. Thanks for having me on today.
Of course. So just to get started, how did you begin your writing career? You have a very, unique story of immigrating as a, from Pakistan to the U.S. And in the midst of that, how did you get started with writing?
Well, I've been writing since so many people you might talk to as a child. And I never thought I would be a writer. I didn't think it was something, I thought everyone did that, just writing in their free time, had a stack of notebooks as I grew older, starting all the way probably as young as third grade or second grade, and just scribbling and writing and coming up with stories. So it was not something I planned on to have as a career, especially in Pakistan in those days. It wasn't really considered a career at all. I doubt if it is even now. So, yes, when I was 22 years old, I immigrated to the US, and now I've lived here in the US for about 20 odd years. And it was only when my kids were older that I realized that I wanted to write books that were about kids like them. And so I thought that I would kind of take the next step to making this, to seeing if this could be an option for me. And wrote a few stories that didn't go anywhere. There was a lot of rejection, a lot of years of writing things that weren't good enough, until I got to the point where I published the Yasmin books, and then onward to
And
to
that
what
was
I
your
have
ticket
now,
in.
which is a lot more books.
Yeah, I think that was really the changing point, right? Like that was the with the Yasmin series. That's I think what you got your break in the industry per se.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Especially for children's literature. I had written a couple of books for adults before that, by small presses, textbook, a nonfiction, and then fiction. But it wasn't until I started writing for kids that I really got my own groove. And I think that that's really important when you write what you're passionate about and what you love writing, is when you're able to really make that, break that barrier and get to the point where somebody else notices your passion too.
yeah, absolutely. And how does your experience as a Muslim American, as a Pakistani American, inform your writing, influence your writing, if at all?
Everything that I write has that identity of those two identities of mine: being South Asian, being Pakistani American, being an immigrant, being a Muslim. All of those are kind of tied into my writing, because those are the characters and the stories and the feelings and emotions that I write about. So I was doing a school visit virtually with some kids a couple months ago, and this kid asked me, "Would you ever write about characters that are not Muslim?" And I didn't even have to think about it. I said no. That might limit me, but I don't feel like it limits me, because there's so many stories to tell. And there's not enough right now out there about the diversity of the Muslim experience, about the South Asian experience, about the Pakistani or even immigrant experience. They're very limited compared to the number of stories out there in general. So I think that that really informs, kind of influences everything I write, because I think it's such an important part of me, and it's such an important part of my readers. And even if you are not at all of that identity, I feel that you can relate in some way. You might not be from Pakistan or from a background like that, but if you have any kind of immigrant background, you're going to identify with that, with some of those experiences. Or you might not be Muslim, but if you're of any faith, there are things that we have in common with each other. So you don't have to be of sharing an identity with me to enjoy my books. And I think that really, I take that very seriously when I write.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, they say write what you know, and eventually you'll find an audience for it. I mean, even for me, I just tend to gravitate toward a lot of stories with South Asian protagonists, with Indian characters, Indian settings, things like that. And or if they're in the U.S., they'll be South Asian American kids. And I didn't even notice it until someone pointed it out. I'm like, wow, I didn't even realize I just gravitate toward that. But I
That's
mean,
great.
people kind of I think you can find a little bit of yourself in every story, regardless of where it's set, who it's about, all that stuff. There's something tangentially that I think you can relate to in every single story.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
So, what would you say your mission or your goal is as a writer? We've talked a lot about representation of Muslim Americans, of Pakistani Americans, and of just of that kind of East meets West kind of culture. But would you say that's your major goal, kind of representing that, or what would you say is like your big mission as a writer?
Yeah, I really got into the public sphere in a lot of different ways after 9/11. I had just come to this country. I know for younger audiences, that's like history, but for me and people like me and my age and older, are for us, it's definitely something that shaped a lot of our lives. And so I started doing a lot of interfaith work and then writing for newspapers and other kind of online publications, and returned into my writing books after 9/11. So that has always been my goal. And I think that it will always be my goal, even though I'm writing some lighthearted, children's chapter book or some deep nonfiction work. It doesn't matter. The goal is the same, which is to kind of like battle stereotypes that people have in. For me, my audience is mostly American or Western audiences or readers, so I limit myself to that. But just breaking down those barriers of stereotypes and misunderstanding and misinformation that's there in the media, and I feel like my talent is writing, so I try to address those stereotypes. Hey, you think all Muslims are like that, but if you read any of my books, you'll realize that's not really true. And even though it's fiction, there's so much wealth of that real life experience in how these characters live and what they do and what the stories are themselves, that you kind of hopefully get a more truthful and accurate representation than what's there in a lot of people's minds. So that's always my first and foremost mission. And then I try to think, okay, what are my kid readers going to actually enjoy? So make a story based on that. But the ultimate goal is always the same.
Yeah, I think so. I was talking with an Afghan author a couple months ago, Bahram Rahman, and his big thing was his was a shift to writing for Western audiences about his home country, and about the culture that they have there because he's in Canada, and I mean he's like if you say the name Afghanistan, then there's an image that comes to people's minds, and he's like that's not the right image that people should be having of the country. It's very different. So I mean, I think it's a common thing for a lot of authors, especially immigrant authors from that part of the world. It's a really great mission to have to just kind of be wanting to change that popular perception of the place that you're from, of the culture,
Yeah.
of the religion as a whole, all of that.
Well, that is true. Sometimes, unfortunately, we, as authors or whatever creative pursuit we have, sometimes um, we get we get burdened by that. Like, why do I have to change the mindset of billions of people? I just want to be a person. I just want to be a writer. I just want to do whatever. Why do I have this huge responsibility? But then, people like me and the author you mentioned, probably we kind of embrace that responsibility. At least we can do something about it. And I agree. My first fiction book, which was actually for adults, Brick Walls, Tales of Hope and Courage from Pakistan. It's not even in print anymore, but that's how I really, that's the reason I wrote it originally, was to let people know about the beauty and the culture of Pakistan. And now it's kind of different. Now it's more about kids like you, or people who are growing up here or who live here, where that's a slightly different outlook of that first generation or second generation experience.
Right. And I hear that you've taken on quite a task for this year, publishing a lot of books. What's the count that you have?
Oh, gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, I think I have like 22 or 23 books published right now, which, you know what? I try to tell people it's not that big a deal because most of those are in the Yasmin series, which the Yasmin series is really popular, but they're also very short books for little kids. So it's not like I've been writing, huge novels all this time. There are going to be 20 books in the Yasmin series this year, which is kind of my most
Jeez.
popular and well-known series. Um, but yeah, I have been writing more. I'll have many books out, I think 8 or 9 this year, and then more than that, 10 or 11 next year. Again, a lot of series, which publish multiple books during the year. And I'm very grateful. I'm very blessed that publishers have kind of um, seen this opportunity first of all and realized that this is writing about people like me and my children. Stories about people like me and my children are not, they're commercially viable, right? People will buy
Mhm.
them because ultimately it is a business, and no one wants to publish stories that no one's going to buy or read. So having that support from my publishers, from my editors, that what I write will be accepted and embraced and celebrated. That's a really huge thing, especially when you're not writing the mainstream,
Yeah.
stories. So um, it just so happened. I think the pandemic was a good time for me to just hunker down in my house and not go anywhere and write a lot more than what I was used to.
That's just crazy considering that a lot of authors will take 2 years to write one book, and you're writing,
Uh,
9 books in a single year. It's amazing. That's just
Well, I mean, I will caution. A lot of those books are like literally little books, like not 20,
sure.
30 pages. So it's not a huge burden. But yes, I am very lucky. My kids are older, they're in high school and middle school. I don't have that kind of, I don't have another job. This is my real job. A lot of writers have other jobs and then they're writing on the side, or they're homemakers, or they're taking care of little kids. A lot of those realities are difficult to kind of jumpstart your career. So I'm very grateful that I don't have those issues and I can just literally spend all day writing if I want to.
And how has that experience been for you? Just, writing all these books. What's something that you've kind of learned from working on all these different manuscripts at once, whether it's the part of the Yasmin series or whether it's a longer book? How have you kind of grown from that?
I mean, that's a good question. Sometimes I have to stop myself and think about, what am I learning? Often you're so busy with what you're doing, especially when you have a lot on your plate, that it's hard to just sit back and assess yourself. So, I need to do that more. I think that if I really think about it, I learned a lot about myself as a person, as a writer. So oftentimes the biggest lessons you have are really about yourself, and those can be really life changing. I know that when you're younger, kids don't really appreciate that, but as you get older you realize that learning about yourself and your limits and your talents can be so life changing. So I think that I learned a lot about myself and how much I can push myself. I didn't honestly think I could be doing this so much, and when I really did push myself, I learned that I could, I might be stressed out about deadlines, but I can do it, and I really flourish under deadlines. But I also learned that I learned so much from my readers. I mean, I get messages every single day on social media or by email. I meet a lot of kids online now the last couple years through virtual visits. I've been visiting schools and libraries throughout the country, definitely, but also other countries, the world. And just the amount of, you know, kids want stories like that they can see themselves in those books, that they can see a world that's different. And if you're not like that, then something that's different but you can identify with and relate to. So I learned so much about what readers need and what they are looking for, and that really definitely informs how I write, because I want to make sure that I'm giving my readers what they need, and not just writing in my little tower, not really being related to, you know who I'm writing for. So keeping that in mind is really important to me as well.
So, what do you hope that readers take away from your latest book, Yusuf Azim is Not a Hero?
Yeah, Yusuf Azim is not a hero is a book about 9/11, but it's not really a book about 9/11 currently, or repercussions of it, but also kind of partly a historical, or at least sections of it are historical in terms of the journal entries that are on there. So it's a story about Yusuf, who's a boy in middle school in current times. Literally, there's a pandemic going on. He is starting middle school. He's excited about robotics, but he lives in a small Texas town, and he is kind of having a hard time understanding why, with the 20th anniversary of 9/11 coming up, which was last year when the book came out, um, why people in his town are so riled up. They're hurting each other physically, verbally, emotionally, and he doesn't understand why something that happened so long ago is affecting people today. And I wrote this book because I know that for young people today, it's really hard to relate to any historical event, but especially one that their parents and grandparents and teachers and people that know are adults are kind of still talking about it. And when I meet kids who are this age, they often ask me when I talk about this book, they even ask things like, well, what is 9/11? And it really struck me. I did not realize that so many children who are in middle school or high school don't know anything about this. They certainly don't know how it's affected things like our laws, and things like how our culture's changed, how people view each other has changed. So when I hope that when people read this book of any age, honestly, it's not just for kids, it's for anybody of any age. When you read this book, you understand what happened 20 years ago, but also understand how what happened 20 years ago changed how life is, and how you can help and support people who might still be affected by it. Um, that you it's not even on your radar as a person maybe, but it has changed people's lives. It continues to affect people's lives, and how you can do something to make a difference. So it's a hopeful book, but it has a lot of serious topics in it that I hope that people get
Yeah, no, of
to
course.
analyze.
Of course, yeah. So, just to wrap up, what is your advice to any up and coming authors, folks who are just getting started on their first manuscript, or even kids who just want to write a short story?
Well, my advice to anybody who's starting out, that whatever age you are, number one is that be a really big reader. It's amazing how many people want to write, but they're not really into reading as much, because that's how you learn not only what good writing is by reading other people's published work, but also getting inspired, and your imagination getting that little jolt that it needs to get into a world, whether it's a fantasy or a historical or contemporary. When you read books, you kind of just you're immersing yourself in an experience that you hopefully want to replicate. So read a lot, a lot, a lot. That's my number one tip for anybody. If you're not reading constantly, then it's kind of hard to get in that mindset, and you're not going to be as good a writer as if you're reading a lot. And secondly, I encourage people to write regularly. Have a journal, a notebook, something that, now a tablet or Google Docs or something. But just no matter how hard it is, or no matter how futile it seems, have a writing time, even if it's 10, 15 minutes before bed, or anything. But this has to be guarded, right, religiously. If your friends are telling you to play video games, or you need to go out somewhere, it doesn't matter. Your writing time has to be really sacred, because and don't do it for a week or a month or something. Just regularly over years, you will see um the improvement, because you've been practicing.
That's amazing advice. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Faruqi, for chatting with me today. It's really been wonderful to get your perspectives and really hear from someone who's so seasoned in the industry after, and you're working on 20 books this year, however, whatever their length may be. It's really incredible. So thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thank you. It was lovely talking with you, Hassan.
Folks, be sure to check out all of Ms. Faruqi's work and follow her on social media at Saadia Faruqi to stay updated on all the great things she's done. I'm Ishan signing off. See you in the next one, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Bye.